The agenda's Week in Review is devoted this time entirely to the one and only Gordon Lightfoot.
The first year of Mariposa in 1961, he was not accepted to be in the lineup because he sounded too much like the Everly Brothers. And Gord commented on that at our main stage last year, and he said that couldn't be all bad, could it, to be compared to the Everly Brothers? and he was quite right. 1962, he was accepted, and his career was taking off. And I would say Gord's been a huge supporter of not only the community of Orillia and various institutions in the community, but also Mariposa. So in 2000, when Mariposa came back to Orillia after, a varied nomadic journey across Ontario, Gordon was the headliner for the first year back, and that ensured the success of Mariposa going forward. People bought tickets to see him. He waived his fee, and it really set Mariposa on a road of success that we haven't turned back from in the last 23 years. So we certainly are grateful for that.
That's an extraordinary, generous thing for him to have done, particularly, Alan,
Yes.
since the place rejected him at first. I mean, wouldn't you want the name and address of the person who had the temerity to reject him back in 1961?
Yeah, that's kind of like Decca Records saying that beat groups and rock and roll combos were out and refusing to sign the Beatles. But he was in his formative years in the early 1960s. He really hit his stride starting in about the mid 60s. And I think he was embraced by Canada for a number of reasons around then. He was in the right place at the right time because let's go back to 67, 68. Canada had just celebrated its centennial. It was this young country with full of optimism and promise. Expo 67 in Montreal. We had the Yorkville scene in Toronto, that 2 square block area north of downtown, where it was a breeding ground and incubator for so many acts. Neil Young, Joni Mitchell, Buffy Sainte-Marie, John Kay, Rick James. It goes on and on and on. He was an important part of that. And then by the time we get to the early 1970s, his sound was such that, like I said earlier, he was an international phenomenon. And as a matter of fact, I think that people who did not grow up with Gord in the 1970s, that time when he was at his commercial peak, don't realize exactly how big of an artist he was globally and what kind of an influence he had on so many other songwriters around the planet, including the biggest names you want to mention.
Well, this would have been one of those hits that made him just a superstar. Sheldon, let's go.
The leisurelands on from the Chippewa down of the Big Lake, big old Gitchagoonie. The lake, it is said, never gives up the dead when the skies of November turn gloomy. But the lullaby ore, 26,000 tons more than the Edmund Fitzgerald weighed empty. That big ship and true was a bone to be chewed when the gales of November came running.
I don't know how to answer this question. I barely know how to ask it. But Alan, you first and then to Pam. You wouldn't necessarily have thought that there was a hit record in a song that goes into such engineering specifics about the sinking of a ship in a Great Lake. And he did it as well with the Canadian Railroad Trilogy, which was commissioned by CBC in 1967 to celebrate our centennial and was an ode to the building of the railroad. And again, a long, long song that goes into chapter and verse about all of this. How do you take that kind of specificity, Alan, and turn it into a hit record?
It's very difficult. I want to say thank you, Gordon Lightfoot, for the record of the Edmund Fitzgerald, because as a radio person in the era when we had to play records on the radio and we had deadlines every 3 minutes, there was nothing like the record of the Edmund Fitzgerald to give somebody a little bit of a bathroom break. Thank you very much. And also my favorite Canadian song ever, written in 6/8 time. It was very interesting what Gord was able to do, because I think a lot of us of a certain age grew up with Canadian history being forced on us. This idea that it was like broccoli, like vegetables. It's not as exciting as some of the other histories of other countries, but this is where you live. This is what you should be paying attention to. Consume it. It's good for you. And there was that sense of, almost cheesiness with some people who were doing that back in those days. But for whatever reason, Gordon Lightfoot was able to take all these Canadianisms and make them palatable and make them compelling and make them singable. And this is something that we have not seen with a lot of our performers. I guess the best contemporary example would be Gord Downie. In fact, I might go so far as to say that if it weren't for Gordon Lightfoot, we may not have had a Gord Downie and the success the Tragically Hip had with all their Canadianisms.
Yeah, Pam, I have no doubt but that the Canadian Railroad Trilogy was played in schools, in classrooms all over the country, and taught kids that there was a time in this fair land when the railroad did not run. And that's how we learned about the laying of the CPR, et cetera. Like for you, how do those songs break through, despite the fact that they may also be treatises in engineering as well?
Yeah, the songs have been with me, my whole life, as they have been with various generations. My mother, my grandmother. Yesterday, my nephew sent me a text of his 3-day-old son, my great nephew, listening to Gordon Lightfoot. So his music spans all generations for sure. And I heard an unverified account this morning that not only did the bells ring 29 times for the Lost Sailors, it rang 30 times, one for Gord. And that's really moving. In 2007, when Gord sang about the Edmund Fitzgerald at Mariposa, the skies opened. The rain poured down. What more fitting background to that song? And I tell you, the audience did not move. They stayed in place and listened to Gord play on. It was really quite a moment in time.
That's a beautiful story. Surprisingly enough, despite all the great songs that he wrote and sang, I think only one #1 hit. And I think this is it. Sheldon, if you would.
Sundown, you better take care if I find you've been creeping round my back stairs. Sundown, you better take care if I find you've been creeping round my back stairs. She's been looking like a queen in a sailor's dream, and she don't always say what she really means.
Again, I think there's a backstory here about a tumultuous relationship that went south. Can you fill in some blanks for us?
My all-time favorite Gordon Lightfoot song, simply because of the lyrical wordplay, the harmonies, the haunting sort of groove that goes along with it. 1974, #1 hit in America with a backstory. Around that time, Gord, still living in Toronto, was hanging around with a woman named Kathy Smith. They had, I guess, some kind of relationship, but in 1975 or 1976, she moves to Los Angeles, but not before she inspires Gordon Lightfoot to write Sundown and, maybe one or two other songs. She goes to Los Angeles, where she becomes a drug dealer and ends up being the supplier to people like Keith Richards and Ron Wood of the Rolling Stones. And then in March of 1982, she becomes infamous as the person who injected that fatal speedball into John Belushi. So there's just so many layers to this particular song that you can get lost in that rabbit hole for quite some time.
The same Kathy Evelyn Smith. I didn't realize that. Okay.
Yeah.
That is, wow. Okay. All right, let's, in our remaining moments here, get your favorite Gordon Lightfoot memories. Pam, you want to start us off? What's your favorite?
There's so many. I mean, certainly Gord graced the stage at Mariposa so many times, sometimes as a hired performer, sometimes he would just show up in the parking lot with his guitar and come across. I think the memory that will stay with me the longest at this point is his induction into the Mariposa Hall of Fame in 2022. He was so happy and so gracious. And of course, we had a number of artists who played a medley during that induction ceremony. Tom Wilson curated it. And we had Blue Rodeo on site, and they participated, as did Blackie and the Rodeo Kings. As we were getting ready for the induction ceremony, Tom would come out and say, okay, the Good Brothers are playing now. I had it choreographed to the second. Tom came out and said, okay, Gord wants the Good Brothers. Okay. Then he'd come back, he'd say, Gord wants Serena Ryder. Okay, like no one's going to say no to Gord, right? Gord wants James Keelaghan. So at that point, I threw the schedule to the wind and said, whatever Gord wants. Gord played first, which wasn't in the schedule, but, we just ran with it. Tom was great. He was able to get all the artists plugged in and hooked up. Our production team rose to the occasion, and it was such a moment for Gord and for the audience. And when I took him to his car that night, he held my hands and he had a tear in his eye, and he just thanked me from the bottom of his heart for that honor. He was just such a humble and gracious person.
I have to follow up on that because that's a glorious story. I mean, artists grow up dreaming of playing Madison Square Garden or dreaming of playing the Rose Bowl or, some massive venue. They don't necessarily tear up after playing a folk festival in their small central Ontario hometown. What do you think it was about you and about it that made him do that?
I think it was being back in Orillia, playing the second festival, and playing the festival so many times over, and having the industry artists join him in that honor. Gord loved to play to people. He loved to play to his audiences, and they loved to have him play. So I think it was a moment in time, and he was just very gracious and generous.
Alan, how about you? A favorite memory?
I'm going to take this in a completely different direction. Here is a list of some of the people who have covered Gordon Lightfoot songs. Elvis Presley, Johnny Cash, Barbra Streisand, Neil Young, Glenn Campbell, The Grateful Dead, Olivia Newton-John, Jimmy Buffett, Sarah McLachlan, John Mellencamp, Johnny Mathis, Paul Weller, The Tragically Hip, Jim Croce, and about a dozen others. But I left the punchline out. His biggest fan was probably Bob Dylan.
That's just one story we covered this week. You can find much more on our website, tvo.org, our YouTube channel at youtube.com/theagenda, or our Twitter feed, twitter.com/theagenda.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.